All right, welcome to COFMUG, February 2019 edition. And today we're going to kick off a new series of meetings called Let's Build It, where we're going to not follow any structured plan or anything. We're just going to get in for an hour and a half or less and just build something out of nothing. So today's topic that we're tackling is virtual lists. We'll kind of explain it as we go along. So the first thing we want to do is start off with a data source. So per the people's suggestion here, we have downloaded the voter file for Gallia County in Ohio. And we're just going to convert that straight into FileMaker with field names first. And OK.
Only we had some sort of processing file.
Some sort of splitternator. All right, so it's going to import that text file into records for me. And here we go. So now I've got a file with real people's data that we can report on. So what should our goal be in terms of reporting? I think what we should do is we should do a pivot report where it is city going down the left side. So we can do residential city. And then we can do number of voters by party affiliation going right. So what that's going to look like when we're done as an Excel export, which, oh man, I don't have Excel. And I doubt I've started numbers in forever, so it's probably going to ask me new document. I mean, we'll spit it out as FileMaker, but I just want to demonstrate really quick what our goal is going to be. So we're going to have cities going down the left-hand side. City 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Then across the top, we're going to have statistics, so number of voters. And then, you know, R and D and null, or something like that. And then what we'll do is we'll fill in these. So what we're going to do is build a virtual list reporting. Now, the reason we want to do this in virtual is because it's flexible. What we can do is we can create a table that's going to store this information for the purpose of exporting it, but it's not going to really contain any actual data that we're going to store long term. So essentially, as far as we're concerned, we're going to wipe out that data when we're done with it each time. But since we're going to store the data for export in a virtual format, that means we'll be able to, we won't have to be concerned with clearing out records, and we can use the same virtual table for multiple different use cases without having to create a field name for number of voters or a field for R or D or null. Or relationships to that data. So let's start with the data structure here. So we've got our Gallia voters. I suppose I can rename that to voters right now. And we're going to have our virtual report. So I'm going to create that. Field-wise here, there's the default FileMaker ones, but we're going to need text for, and I'm going to create one just called column key. That's going to be our first column that has the city names in it. And then I'm just going to do value 1. And we're doing numeric data. I've seen a lot of people make these fields where it's like, you know, number 1, number 2, number 3, text 1, text 2, text. So they have the different field types. I'm actually just going to leave that there for now because we're going to come back in and change these later to calculations. So right now I'm just going to create that table just so we have a layout to go and kind of look at things as we gather it. So I'll switch this to a table view just so we can see that. So how do we do our gathering of data? Well, since we're doing it virtual, we're just going to gather everything into scripted or into global variables so that we can reference them later. So we're going to create a script that says, and you could do this in parts, I guess. So the first thing we're going to have to do is create a list of cities. So let's call this script create virtual voter report or something like that. Now, there's been a couple things that have changed since around, really it was around version 12 of FileMaker when Execute SQL came out that people got into virtual lists because they could do one SQL call to return a already pivoted report into a global variable. SQL's super complicated. You could spend a whole day just talking about writing that. So the couple things that have changed since then is now we have JSON functions built directly into FileMaker, but also we have a super handy function that is a summary field type. That's called the list of type. So this is a new summary type that will give you a list of something. So if I want to create a city list, I don't have to script that anymore. I can just say list of residential city. And then to get my list of cities, so in my script here, I'm going to say, get list of cities. And I'm going to, with the hour-and-a-half timeline, I'm going to skip over things you would normally do, error checking, set error capture on, allow user board off. Killjoy, huh? Right. All right. So for this one, we're just going to go to layout 1, if, nope, count 0, show all records, and then set variable. So this one, I'm going to set our first virtual list. So I'm going to write cities. And I'm going to set it to be that field. Since it's a summary field, it will summarize the whole thing for me. I just need to grab it here.
What context?
What do you mean, what context?
That's
I've gone to the layout to get the context. So now if I just do this and I run this, you see I'm going to go to my data viewer here. And under current, I'm now going to have my cities list.
That was get value?
Yeah, and I forgot that this doesn't dedupe it for you. Oh, crap. Right. So we're going to do execute SQL instead.
Sure you don't want to do that and then sort it too?
Am I sure that I don't want to do the easier method because we're on a time crunch? Yeah. I mean, and this is why I want to do a let's build it thing. This is unscripted. It's the problems you're going to run into when you're building this stuff. So I am going to use execute SQL, but it's a super simple query. It's select distinct, if I can spell right, distinct, and it's going to be, I'm going to comment or quote this so I escape my quotes. And then it's residential city.
Why did you escape it?
Because SQL doesn't like underscores.
But it didn't like spaces.
Doesn't like spaces either. Doesn't like underscores.
Alright.
I think it's usually fine in the center, but underscore the leading is. So select that field from voters. Order by residential city ascending. Ascending's optional because, well, it's the default. So fill out the rest of the function there. And that's it. That's super simple. Distinct will give me only the distinct values. The order by will automatically alpha sort that list for me. So I can actually go back in here and delete that field off of there. Okay, so save that, run it again, and now our cities list should be alphabetical and deduped. So it would be prudent to take the time to check this and make sure that it includes all of your values. But for us, those are the values we had, and that's actually less than I thought. But then again, this is Gallia County, right. So have I actually heard of any of these cities before? I thought Vinton's a county.
I've heard of Waterloo.
Yeah, Gallipolis. Patriot, Ohio. That's a city you can drive to and shake some guy's hand.
So if you just did an index on Res City, that should be identical.
Yeah, it should give you. Yeah.
So there, for virtual lists, there's always going to be different ways to arrive at a list. It's just going to be, it's just going to be like how you assemble your data and how you display your data. So we now have a list of cities. What we need is a list of rows. So we need columns that we want to collect. And this is, stop blowing up the chat window. You're distracting me.
Sorry, that'd be helpful.
I'm just joking.
All right.
So blow up the chat window if you want. It's just a blinking red-orange square at the top of my screen.
Yeah, it drives me crazy.
So this is only going to be a reference for me for what we're going to do, because we're going to actually fill in the values and not actually keep a list of what we're doing. So for, you'll understand when I assemble it all together.
Okay.
So column 1 is going to be city name. Column 2 is going to be total voter count. Column 3 is going to be R count. Column 4 is going to be D count. And I think that's enough to get us started. So what we have to do now is we have to, like, this data doesn't exist in this format. If I go back to like my numbers document, we have the list of cities that we can fill out here. That was the easy part. Now we actually have to like calculate these other 3 columns here using the pivot value from our row to figure out that data. So the easiest way to do that is to do looped finds and gather that data together. So we're going to go first, we're going to break this down. We have column 1, so we can start off with column 2. And column 2 is going to be our total voter count.
So what we're doing is creating a variable that's prepping all of this information that we want to present.
Yeah. So how we're going to do that, because it's easy, is we're just going to do queries for each one of that. We could do this with execute SQL, but if I break it out in define mode, I think more people will understand. So I'm going to give myself a counter here so that I can count every time we're through the loop. I stands for iteration. If I is empty and you add 1 to it, it ends up with 1. So the first time through this loop, it's going to be 1. The next time, 2, 3, 4, 5. Then I'm going to set city. And I'm going to use the get value function, if I can spell right, to get the value from our cities list for the iteration that we're going through the loop. So the first time through the loop, it's going to give me the first city. Second time through, it's going to give us the second city, so on and so forth. Then we're going to exit this loop if value count of cities is greater or less than or equal to I. So the last time you go through, so we have this cities list. It's going to go through, and then the 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. So like the 12th time that goes through the loop, the value count of cities is going to be 12. It's going to see that it's equal to this or less than or equal to this. The less than handles if there's 0 values. So that's why I always use less than or equal to.
Why did you not want a city to be a global variable?
Because every time I go through the loop, it's going to be a different city. So it only needs to be local to this loop.
What variable is it done in
I don't actually need to set the city variable here. I can just use get value for it. So I'm going to use it to do the find now. So now I'm going to enter find mode. I'm not going to pause. And then, you know, if you need it, you can toss the go to layout at the top of this again so that you're in the right context. I'm going to set the field. So what I want to find is the total number. So I'm going to do residential city. I'm going to do an exact search because I have exact values in my distinct list. So I'm going to do the double equal sign and city here. And then I'm going to perform find. So on the top of this, I'm also going to set the error capture as on because I don't want it going dink, dink. For this one, I should have, for this loop at least, I'll always have a found set because that's what built that distinct list. But in the other loops, for some reason, there might not be. TEDx is getting started in the background. Nice. 6:45, yeah. 15 minutes late. We start on time here at COFMUG. Not like those TEDx guys out there. So like if you go looking for values where there might be 0 values and you don't have error capture turned on, you're going to get the modify find thing popping up all the time. But for this one, it should be fine, but I'm going to turn error capture on anyways. So once I do this find, I now have a found set that I can fill out that cell value for. So now I need to decide what structure I'm going to store my data in. So you can do it one of a couple ways, right? You can do, if you know how many columns you're going to have, you could do it in like a column, a single column. You can do a JSON array of values. And actually, I think I'm going to skip over the JSON
Yeah, you
array.
should. Like, let's just do it
All right.
parsing.
So I'm going to do, really quick here, I'm going to do our list. So I'm just going to set another variable of list, and I'm going to give that a list of list and our found count. So all this is going to do is it's going to, like when list is empty, that's just not going to put anything in there. But the second time through this list, it's going to append, it's going to give the return delimited plus our found count. So it's going to build a list of numbers as it goes through this loop. So that when we exit this loop, we're going to have a variable called list that we can then set our global variable to. If you want to do it with the global variable here, that's totally fine as well.
Are you referring to the global variable that gets parsed out for the table itself, or?
Yes.
Okay.
So at the end of all this, after we've gathered that up, we have a local variable that has the list that we are now going to turn into our virtual list. And how we're going to turn that into our virtual list is we're going to set a variable of virtual list or vlist or something like that. We're going to use the repetitions because that's the easiest way to go.
I just screwed that.
Haha.
I should like to hear more about that.
Well, you can. So we're just going to set that to our list. And then what we're going to do is we're going to clear work from column 2. So we're just going to unset all those variables.
So that's the vehicle you use for each column as you go through.
Yeah, you got it. That's the basic structure that you're using to make, you're going to use it.
And you can make each one of these loops smaller if you want to do it. And like I could roll up this whole thing in probably like 3 lines inside this loop, but I'm exploding it out so that it makes sense to what the process is. So city, loop, and list, we are unsetting. So now we've cleared back to our original. So let's go ahead and just do column 3. And since we're doing things in such an easy format, we can just copy and paste all these. So I'm just going to copy and paste from here down for column 3. This one, we just changed the find to where it is, where the party contains, we're doing R next. Wrong button. No, city list is already there. It's already in its own virtual list called cities.
So can I just draw a question?
Yeah.
Okay. What did we do with the variable for vote counts? And where did it go? Did it go into a field? Did it go into a?
I haven't done with that yet, unless I've just really missed that.
Vote counts or voter count? Because what I did first is the count of voters.
Right.
That is now in a list called vlist.
Okay.
And that is just a return delimited list of numbers.
Okay.
Which in our Excel file is going to represent what goes in right here.
Okay. Are we appending to that vlist then with the subsequent columns that we're creating?
So this is where the repetitions question comes in. I'm going to show it with repetitions, but you can do it as separate lists. You can do column 1, column 2, column 3 for all your double dollar signs.
Okay.
The reason I'm doing it as repetitions, I'll explain when we get to displaying the data, which makes it easier.
Thank you.
Okay, so column 3 is going to be our values. And the column I was looking for is party affiliation. So back in here, we do party affiliation equals R and then I don't have to modify anything else. That's the rest of that. What I need to modify though is my vlist. So I'm going to make this go into the second repetition because it's our second column of data. Technically our third column of data.
So you can have repetitions and variables just like you can in fields?
Yes. The caveat is that when you look at your data viewer, for each one of those repetitions, it will show up in the data viewer. So it'll say vlist 0, vlist 1, vlist 2, vlist 3, etc.
It says little brackets with the number in it.
Yeah.
Just like it does with the fields.
Right. So if you have 100 columns, you're going to have 100 variables.
Okay.
And when you go to when you finish that report, you're going to have to clear those out somehow.
Okay. You can create those programmatically so that it can go as far around as you need it.
Yeah, you can do a nested. So if you do a loop inside of a loop to get different column types, then you can do a repetition for each time through the loop, and it can go on 99,999 times. You can go on as long as you
Long
want.
time.
Right. Until FileMaker crashes itself. So I'm going to set that as 2. Then we're going to clear the fields again. Then I'm going to take this whole thing and copy it over again. Loop, loop, loop. So this becomes clear work from column 3. And now we have column 4, our D values. All we need to change here is have that be equals the D. Somebody's making jokes, but not my expense. And then change this so that it's using the next repetition, third repetition. And then we don't really need to clear this.
Don't you need to like track your repetitions?
Huh? No.
Am I already thinking more?
All right. So the thing I am going to write right now is a clear virtual list script. that is going to unset all of the variables that we used in our report. So I'm going to unset cities, and I'm going to create a loop here where I set variable I plus 1. Sometimes you can set a repetition to be 0, so you have to be careful if you don't start at the first repetition. I think that's true, although I'm not entirely. So vlist, and this repetition number now becomes dynamic. So we're now unsetting that.
That's what I was referring to.
So as many as you created, you can clear out that many.
Yep. And I'm just going, so you can wrap this in an if, you can wrap the exit loop in an if statement. Like you can check for the next one being empty,
Okay.
but the script runs so fast that I normally just do something like this. Like put 100,000 iterations in there. Or maybe you can build a separate counter that checks for if it's empty. And like if it gets to 10 empty rows, then you tell it to exit. I mean, there's a number of different ways to do it, but it's just like for instance, for people that create new records and they want you only on that record in the found set, a lot of people did this where they went to go to layout. They went to some layout. They did this. They did show all records. They did new record, omit record, and then show omitted only. And then that would leave them in the found set of the one new record that they created. But the much faster way of doing this is go to layout, omit multiple records, and just give this thing a ridiculous number of values to omit a whole bunch of records, and then do new record. That second way of doing that is much more efficient. But for the first like 8 years of FileMaker development, I did things the first way because it's like, oh yeah, go there, show all records, new record.
It's more efficient in the sense that it runs more quickly, or it's just less code?
Both.
Okay.
Because for me to show all records, that fires off its own stack of actions, including like a summary field and all that stuff. So there are multiple ways to clear repeating global variables. This way is the easiest, and as long as I don't create more than 100,000 columns, I'm good to go. Like, I mean, we could time this script, but it's 10 seconds. So now I have that clear virtual list thing that will clear all of my virtual list stuff out in like 10 seconds. And I can run that like in the background somewhere or something. All right, so we've gathered our information into 3 virtual columns. So let's go back to our data table and work on displaying this. So I'm actually going to run this to create the report. And you'll see here's our virtual data. So we've got our cities list of cities. We've got our first repetition of the vlist. So those are our numeric values that correspond to that whole value of data. Here's the second one. You see there's a 0, so there's a city, there's one city, whatever the 5th city in there has no Republicans, or nobody reporting as Republican ballots. So middle port. And then that one as well for our D column. And we can start adding columns to this report later on if we want to. As we come up with new statistics, all you have to do is add the script, give it the same format, and we have everything else to clear it out or whatever.
Don't like the idea of having to manage the indices, or maybe that's not the best way to say that, but like making sure everything lines up, right? You have a value for each row.
It's fair. So JSON might be a better format for you because JSON is the only thing Well,
See, I feel like I have to interrogate it rather than it just being
Right.
like,
FileMaker doesn't do null values very well.
I know.
And that's the problem with building these kind of like matrix style
Let's
reports.
log it down.
Yeah. So let's display the data. So we're going to go to our virtual report. And remember, we had a column key. So we're actually going to, this one's like get UUID number, right? Or get UUID. I'm surprised, like they came out with,
I don't know.
they came out with an awesome function for get UUID number. And then when they rolled out this like default fields thing, they didn't use it. Just boggles my mind with FileMaker sometime. So we're going to do a,
That column key, that's not.
we're going to
use
do,
the relational field, right? The predicate in a relationship.
no, that's going to, that's what I'm making now with row number. So row number is going to be serial number generated. So row number is going to determine which row of virtual data we get. So column key now becomes a calculation field. Yes, I want to change it to a calculation. And this is going to be get value from our virtual list. And this is our first column, so it's going to be cities. And we're going to get the value of row number. This is going to be a text result, and I'm going to set it to automatically evaluate.
And is that stored in the default setting, or do you have to set that?
It's the default setting.
Okay.
Or,
I think it's stored right now.
nope. Well,
It is stored.
It-
Maybe not stored, so check.
yes, but it is also not indexed. So I'm going to leave that alone and let it make up its own mind for now. So value 1, which is going to be our first number column, this also turns into a calculation. This turns into get value. This is going to be our V list. And I can put 1 in here, although I don't need it for the repetition number. And this is going to come from row number. I try to put it in there as a variable. That's a number, always evaluate, so that it gets a 0 if it's there. All right, now I'm going to duplicate that one twice. And I'm going to call this value 2. Text, or sorry. I don't know what I'm doing. I'm just renaming now. That's all I need to do. And then this is going to come for our second repetition. And then value 3 is going to come from our third repetition.
So you would still have to create as many fields
Records. Or as many fields as you want to support, yes.
as you want to go to the right.
I'm waiting for that payoff where you explain how it's easier.
What?
With the using reps for, you're saying it pays off later because it makes how you decide to display.
It makes
reports
this easier. So now I can set vlist1 from any virtual list I want to run. And I don't have to have specific column names that handle specifically named column. So like I can create an entirely different second report that uses vlist. I can create 50 columns worth of fields to support up to 50 columns of report.
Sure, I understand that value. In what way would you be hindered using a delimited row list?
It's a limited row.
Sorry, so like, using pipe to separate your actual values that, you have a calc field that looks at the get value equal to the row number in your display virtual list table.
It takes longer to calculate. I mean, if you're doing text parsing out of the virtual list, it's going to take longer to process. Get value is just going to go and pluck the value out of the list. It doesn't need to search between parts of a string.
Well, no, so the way I've seen this done typically is there's another field that would parse your delimiter, right? And then what your field would then do is look to the calculation field in that record to see what its value is.
That sounds much more complicated than what I'm trying to explain here.
Maybe it's just because that's how I learned to do it.
So the one last part to display our virtual report that we'll need from this point is to create the number of rows that we need for this report. So I'm going to write at the end of our script, go to report layout, create rows. So I am going to go to layout, virtual report. I'm going to truncate the table to clear out everything that's there already. I suppose I can truncate it before I go there. I'll make things even faster. And then I'm going to make another loop, set my I counter. Iteration counter. I'm going to create a new record. I'm going to exit the loop if I greater than or equal to value count of our cities. And then I'm going to do replace field contents because it's an incremental serial number of our row number, serial numbers, custom values. I'm going to start with row number 1, increment it by 1. So that'll take care of resetting the serial number each time I run this report. You can augment this to make it more powerful for if you want to add like a session key so that users don't have the danger of bleeding reports over onto one another in the same table. So let's say I want to do that.
If it's global, well, yeah, because you still have actual records.
Yeah. But you'll have like the number of records. So you can add a key for EUID and set it there and make sure to constrain the found set like right before you do the export, that type of thing, or only delete records that are from your current session, but you know, you have to clean up after that now. For this case, let's keep it simple. So now when I run this report, create virtual voter report, there we go. So now we have, that was Command plus. Why are you giving me that for? I swear Zoom has been like terrible lately. All right, so here's our virtual report.
How do you handle labels?
You create a label row.
Yeah.
So if you want to label your stuff, you can do that. Let's do that as a next example. So right before I create my report or after I create my report, or actually it's going to go before. So I'll do label row.
That way it shows up on the Excel, right?
Yeah.
Or whatever the.
That easy. So I'm going to set variable vlist list. This is going to be total voter count. Duplicate. 2, 3, total R count, 2, total D count value list 3. So That's how I do labels. And now the number of records it creates is better, or will take care of that for me. So since I'm just recollecting data in the same report, I'm just gonna add it. Although it does give you this conundrum of
Spacing.
no, text value in a number field.
Why would you not make them all text to begin with?
Because what if I want to display this in FileMaker as a number field?
Use get as number and put that here.
Or maybe I make another column that has number format or something like that. But since this is a number result, I should just be able to do as entered or decimal and use the thousand separator. So it doesn't like that that's like that, but now it will make that a number. So I'm just going to leave it as general for now so it shows back up. So now from here, all you have to do is export that, and that's your report. So at any point of time, you can alter what's in the global variables. Like if I want to actually like play around with this and like change it so it's in title case or something, I can do that. And since I didn't make that an unstored calculation, I'll need to refresh the window. No. Column key. Let's make you unstored. There we go. So yeah, unstored calcs if you're going to be modifying after you create the records. Okay, quick tick on there. All right.
And does the performance benefit come, I mean, obviously it comes out of putting everything in variables to start with where there's not much load there, but.
You mean the performance benefit versus writing this to records?
Yeah. Is that coming, well, I guess.
There's a slight performance benefit, but there's a slight performance benefit, but the better reason to do it this way is to support multiple reports in the same framework.
Okay.
Imagine if you have two people trying to run that same report with different parameters.
Right, exactly.
So like I can duplicate my script now. It's already set up to run a report, and then I can have it do 3 separate, entirely separate statistic columns.
Right.
Not have to change the table, the columns,
Relationships.
anything in the scripts really, aside from just what it looks for and what the header row says. I mean, this script can be adapted very easily to that. The only thing I need to make sure of is that I have enough fields that represents the number of columns I want to make.
Okay. So if you, like I've got a pretty big report that, you know, it's probably got 20, 30, 40 columns or more.
Yeah.
So it's still going to be a pretty gnarly database with a lot of field, or a lot of,
Yeah, I mean, for you to aggregate the report data, but here's the thing, like you have a hosted file, you can set all those finds to happen on the perform script on server,
right.
and then have it return to you the resulting list that you need, that you set locally for the user. So you take all the performance overhead of doing that. And that's why this virtual listing stuff all was coming around when it did, was because we were starting to get those tools. We got execute SQL, we got perform script on server, all of that's new since version 12.
And that solved 2 of these problems.
Yeah.
I will say another benefit of using the method that you just outlined is that it's easier to modify. Because if you use a different method to make an exact report of, you know, like if you go through and make those 50 columns, like, okay, we want one more something. Well, then you got to go and shift everything down one and how you put the information together. That's really not fun.
Who's been chatting? You got the execute SQL reference. So, do you want to see what it looks like to do one of these columns on execute SQL?
Yeah. That's what I was going to ask. Like, is there a performance like using execute SQL versus the loop finds, I assume there's.
It depends on how your fields are indexed and how much data you have. There's not a really great answer for it.
But it's not like, oh my gosh, this way is so much faster.
No.
Okay.
There's a lot of times when execute SQL is slower.
Okay.
Because it's still going through the calculation engine.
Right. When you get like really up there, I've noticed that SQL is not as fast.
It's everything like in my use cases that I've seen it for, it's whenever you create a join to join two tables together.
So.
Or whenever you have more than like 50,000 records on a table.
How does anybody attending feel about making a virtual list now? Not here.
Don't interrupt anybody's dinner.
See where everybody's at.
19, yeah, there's only 19,000 records in here, so it's still pretty fast. So execute SQL, let's do it for the first one, for the R values. And I'm going to copy and duplicate this and just comment out what we're replacing. So this is going to be execute SQL. I'll delimit this one a little more than I did the last one. So we're going to select count from voters. There's no where clause here because we're selecting the total voter counts. We're going to group by residential city. And I think there might be an order that this goes in, but I'm not entirely sure. Then we're going to order by residential city. Not sure if order by has to come before group by or afterwards.
I'll check the reference I posted.
So this would be where I would be worried about it skewing off the cities. Like, but we'll see if this is accurate or not. Ask Sam if he wanted to see this, and he just all right, so I'll do this the easy way. Just screenshot this, and then we'll run this again and see if that worked. Looks mostly the same. Desktop. 2823936791. Everything got a value. Everything got the right value. So yeah, I don't think that was any faster. I actually think it was a little bit slower. So that's execute SQL. So what else are we going to talk about?
You could ask if anybody has questions.
We could.
Okay.
Or we could open the door and let the people back in the room. Right, so that execute SQL worked. I took a screenshot to check it, validate it. So you can essentially replace all of these lines of code with one line. Okay. Performance-wise, it was the same or maybe slightly slower.
Okay. I don't believe
it. I mean, we can test it if we really want to.
We don't.
We don't want to. All right, so.
We can get this file when we're done.
Oh yeah, I'll post it somewhere. So yeah, so the keys here is that we're grouping data here. So we're selecting a count of records, which is like a summary count field from our voters table. We're grouping by and we're ordering by that residential city, and that groups it together and orders it in the ascending order, the same order that we're pulling our city list in.
Okay.
You'd have to watch out for this if you didn't already like order your city list.
Okay.
In the right, because if you're doing it this way, then it's not like it's not a given that it's in the same order. Like, because this SQL query could be different than the other SQL query. Whereas if you do it in the loop, so if you do it with all of this stuff, since it's pulling the query that it looks for straight out of your cities list, you know it's going to be accurate for what row it's going to be in. You'll want to make sure that you have like the error capture turned on and so that you end up with a 0 if there is a 0 in there. There was a 0 somewhere in here, I thought.
I recall that.
Although I don't see it in this list. Oh yeah, right here. Northup has 0.
I thought it was the other one, Middleport last time.
Well, Northup also only has 1 voter listed, so
That's suspect.
yeah, let's go check that out. What's going on, Northup?
Yeah, that's Dave. We just decided he could go for all of us.
It is one person, Mr. Robert Jenkins, born in 1941.
He rules that town.
He is, man, like now I want to Google this.
Robert knows best.
Northup, Ohio. It's got its own Wikipedia page. It must be a thing. A post office called Northup was established in 1858. And that's all. An unincorporated community in Gallia County. He must be, maybe he's the pastor at that Baptist church.
That would make sense.
And the church is the entire city. Operates as its own independent jurisdiction. That type of thing. All right, so performance caveats, like I said, you can ship this off to perform script on server for this kind of stuff. The biggest issue then becomes making sure that you get the data back in the format that you want so that you can set it for the user.
But you're building a table, so you don't have to do anything.
Well, the table doesn't contain any data. So like if I go back to my report, the table is generated from these virtual lists. If I knock out one of these virtual lists, like it will knock out this table. Well, yeah, I didn't have it as an unstored calc. So. Right. But if I like deleted that row and like recreated that row, well, now it doesn't have the right number, but yeah. So like if I ship stuff to the server, if I have the server, that's when I might use JSON or something. Getting the values all back from the server, because the problem is if you do it all at the same time on the server, you need a way to receive a list of lists, because most virtual list reports are lists of lists.
Depends on where your delimiter is. So you can use like the C section or the yang or like a byte, what is that, byte order mark?
Yeah, I hate using delimiters though, because every time I've used a delimiter, somebody has found a way to have that delimiter in their code or in their.
I'm not saying I haven't been burned before, but you just haven't competed with them. Like a pipe was a poor choice, frankly.
Yeah, but like an open, oh, it's not modifiable, but I've had one thing before where it was like open bracket, star, 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 like pipe, 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 star, 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 close bracket. And that somehow wound up in somebody's record content. Like ridiculous combination of delimiter.
And you like randomly make one.
Like it was something random that I made like that I figured like, well, nobody's going to have an 8-character delimiter.
Exactly what they thought.
You have a UUID limiter.
Yeah. And you're like the 1 in 64 quadrillion like combinations that actually matches a UUID to something in your record data. That's just like luck. And the worst thing is it's going to happen when you're demoing it with a client, like right in front of their face. And they're going to say, wow, that row has like 50,000 records. Or like, why does that county have all zeros? I know I have data in my system for that. And you're like, that's a great question. I have no idea what the answer
you wouldn't
is.
guess that off the top.
Yeah, so like finding and that's why I stopped liking delimiters, is because, like, you know, when you're working with like fixed width
I don't think
files.
that's a big problem, honestly. Like, you can pick something real strange that's not going to be out there.
But if you over-engineer something too, you're
Well, yeah, I mean, there's obviously a balance to be walked with all things.
you got to walk the fine line. You got to think to yourself, how much am I going to use this in the future? Because, like, if they want this one simple report, and I don't think they're going to want 50 other reports, then I'm not going to build a super complex dynamic structure. But if, like, maybe I'm in Sam's shoes and he's doing a report where it's, you know, 50 columns that change frequently, you know, between different field types and different data types, and it's right till for the right job. So our FileMaker instruction, or our FileMaker building it, needs to reflect that, so that if anybody watches this on YouTube like 3 months from now, they don't just totally like think it's too complicated. It's not complicated. You gather data into global variables and you display that data. That's virtual lists. You can make it ridiculously complicated if you want to. But yeah, so that was under 1 hour. I guess at the beginning of this one I said we should hurry up and rush because it's going to take too much time. I wasn't.
JSON. Or
JSON.
ask the audience.
Well, if anybody wants to post something in the chat window, they can, but I'll move on to JSON. So what I'm going to do for JSON is I'm going to go grab Todd Geist's library. Thanks. So if you just do Geist JSON functions, I forget which one it is. It's one of these. It's one of these two.
JSON additions.
Latest commit March 2nd, 2017. Oh yeah, additions adds on. These functions were introduced before the.
Oh, those ones?
Yeah. This one is the right one. JSON additions is the right one because it adds on to FileMaker's data functions. So go to here, download zip, open zip. JSON additions. Ooh, he's got it as like FMFN files. Okay, so file, manage, custom functions. Take all these. So these come with a bunch of nice built-in functions. Actually, FM Better Forms uses this function library as well. FM Better Forms, which yep, I've been working on a project in that as well. That'd make a nice next meeting thing. So let's take a look at some of these functions for what they do. Manage custom functions. There's no zoom in on here. Let me think of what we're going to use out of this. Contains property. I think we're going to use array concat. Or no, array concat just sticks two arrays together.
What's your intent?
I don't know. I said JSON and like
I mean, the way I've been building my JSON is just looping through stuff and building an array or an object that I call an array and sticking some other object.
Array from related. And nobody posted on chat.
And there's that cookie guy out there who used his SQL to return valid JSON.
Yeah. Well, I'm trying to think of it in virtual list perspective of what we would want to use JSON for.
Because of that, I think this kind of breaks down.
No, so you can create.
So you have, wouldn't you have an array?
So we were talking about this before. So let's build a different kind of thing here.
Would you mind making a separate script for that?
Yeah.
So people can hear what I'm trying to figure out what the hell it all does.
Yeah. We'll do a JSON version here. So instead of this cities, I still want to do the cities the same way. But for this one, let's build this into a JSON list.
You're going to have to change the records or the get value to what the index of the array, right?
So we'll need JSON set element. We're going to, we're going to set our list as our JSON. Our key is going to be our I path. Our value is going to be get found count. And our type is going to be JSON. Is it number or integer? I always forget. Number. All right. So this should build a JSON list. So I'm going to end the script right here, and I'm going to run this via debugger to see like what the heck we get. Da 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 da.
So
well, he asked, is it going to make an array? And I didn't have an answer, so I just started singing.
So the behavior's been like, so no, it's not.
Well, yes, it's an object because I didn't make anything that was a JSON array type. So let's paste it and see if it's even valid JSON.
What's that all right? That's name value, name value.
There we go. So there are our counts in that form. So assumably, if I made, I'm going to just stop it right there because we've got it. But if I go into my database for my virtual report and I do value 1, duplicate that to value 1 JSON. God, no. What are you doing? So I have value 1 JSON. This is going to become JSON get element from this, which is now JSON, and from that key.
Was it value?
Nope. I can only also use the what's the custom function? Pluck, maybe. There's probably a better custom function for it, but for now, let's see if that even works. So modify this to add my field value on JSON. Oh, hey, it works. Let's make this unstored so nobody thinks I'm hiding anything up my sleeve later on. So that one now became this because now that it's in JSON, this thing doesn't have a return delimited list in it anymore. So now the get value function doesn't work. But this one does, and remember I didn't actually run the row thing in this. Also, I didn't add a row to cities. So I need to actually do that in the report, because otherwise Sam's gonna yell at me for why the field labels don't work. Actually, they do. I did add that city name. Never mind. So in the JSON version, this list just comes this way. But we can't do labels the same way in JSON. But we can do them this way. Because remember, all of our counters start at 1. And as we know, JSON indexes are all 0 indexed.
I have gotten around that so far by removing element 0.
So we'll do JSON set element. JSON is vlist 1 element 0 total voter count, and that is JSON string. This is 2 total R count, and this is 3. I also need to add our other field copies. So this is value 2 JSON and value 3 JSON. So this may make it easier for you to pass the data back from the server because it's now in JSON format, which not only supports arrays of lists, but you can pass back multiple objects in the same return value. So you can run it all in one script, return it as JSON, and then set these all as JSON get element array 1, JSON get element array 2. Or you can store it all in one and do your calculations to pull from that. But that's going to start running into the problem Dave was talking about before the meeting, where it's performance of having to go through all that and becomes messy. So value 2 JSON becomes 2. Value 3 JSON becomes 3. And this is what most people have hated about repetitions in FileMaker, especially in like global calculations, is that there is no right way for doing 0 index or indexing starting at 1. So like all of my virtual lists start.
Can you make a 0? Can you make a repetition 0?
I think so.
Is that valid? That's valid.
Mm-hmm. Oh, good. You can answer that while I see if this actually works. So we have value 1 JSON. We're going to add value 2 JSON, and we're going to add value 3 JSON to the layout. Oh, they already got added. Value 3, value 2. Okay, and those are question marks because we haven't actually run the rest of the script yet. So let's see if this works. I just want to run it straight up. Yes, but it didn't do the field numbers. And it didn't do the field numbers because I didn't offset the row count for these JSON fields to have a -1. So since we're using a 0 index array in these calculations, I need to add minus 1 to the row number, so it goes to a 0 index.
You can't have a 0 repetition.
You can or cannot?
You can't.
Thanks, FileMaker. But 1 is the default and not 0, which is why it's a problem. Ah, ta-da! There we go. So we now have, I just unplugged my laptop, but I'm good. I think I can last 20 minutes. So now we have the regular version, and we have the JSON version.
Sandy, you know me closer.
Yeah.
How you round all that stuff up, it's going to be a bigger one, I think.
Yeah. No, I do. I feel absolutely.
I mean, start small. Start with your first column just to get the names of each row that you're going to come together, and then think about what the first value column is going to be and just add it on. I mean, you can architect it any way you want. It's FileMaker. So if you want to do each one of the columns as its own separate script and then call something that groups them all together, you could do that. You can take it, I guess, I mean, you can take it as far or as short as you want to take it.
Yeah, I was just looking at the sample spreadsheet. Like I said, I'd like to see what it's yeah, it just varies, you know, it can be. But there's going to be a good 20, 30 columns.
Yep.
And hundreds of rows.
Yep. Well, I mean, so I have this file. I could import the statewide voter file into this now because it's like the same format.
Yeah.
But if I run the same report, it's going to give me.
For all the cities.
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay.
This is now data agnostic to whatever file I throw in there. It's going to give me every single city in the state with all these numbers if I drop it in here.
Yeah.
So I only have to write this once, and it handles that different information. Which is nice.
Mm-hmm. No, this is, yeah, I feel a lot better. The JSON, I'm still, you know,
Yeah.
getting there.
Yep. So what we're doing for like the new FM Better Forms project is like a lot of people are starting to store a field that is a representation of each record as JSON.
What is FM Better Forms?
FM Better Forms? Well, we'll get to that in a bit, but I'm going to wrap up our meeting recording now unless anybody online has questions. So thank you. We're going to stop here, and I'm going to figure out how I can post this file for people to download from YouTube as well. Or if you're, hopefully you followed along in the last hour and built your own file, but yeah, the people didn't see where I downloaded the data, so I'll link that as well if people want to use that as a sample data file.